there have been 5 additional comments made by local residents after the publication of the agenda. Those comments are largely outside the scope of this application because they cover matters that are outside of the land use planning system. So coming to the proposal, this is a change of use from the science education area to accommodation for religious teachings, essentially a church. The site is northern corner of the leisure zone, within, and this boundary here shows it's within the town centre boundary. Shows it in a bit wider context in terms of the relationship to adjoining neighbours, so it's a long way away from neighbours. Large car parking area within the town centre. Application site, separate entrance located to one side of the main entrance into the leisure centre. Shows the existing layout, and that shows the proposed layouts. Chairs in the hall, and then various meeting rooms. So, as I said, the proposal is for a change of use to accommodate for religious purposes, and as come through to parking, and as I've already indicated, there are extensive parking already at the leisure zone of 600 spaces. So, coming to the main issue is whether the change of use from science education to a church would result in any harm. And members need to be focused on what harm would this actually cause. The leisure zone building is a building within the town centre, and the proposed use is very similar to the existing use, so you're changing from education use to a church. Both uses fall within policy L2, which supports a whole range of uses for recreation, sporting, cultural and community uses. Both uses are supported by policy L2. A church is a community use and supports the wider community. So there's no issue of a church in this particular location, particularly as it's within the town centre. So then it comes down to, would the use result in any harm to the existing uses that take place on the site? The site is actually only 575 metres squared, and that means that it would only require 58 car parking spaces in accordance with the standards. And as you can see from this plan, there is plenty of parking on the site, and there's also plenty of parking within the town centre. So in terms of parking, there's no issue. In terms of the impact on the existing uses of the leisure zone, there would be no impacts. There would be no impacts on the residents. In accordance with the council's policies, the recommendation is to grant. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 2 speakers. Miranda Isherwood, come forward. Either table, switch on the mic. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So as a member of Harlow Leisurezone and a resident of Harlow, I wish to object to the submitted planning application. Council officers have stated that it is not found that the proposed change of use would result in any demonstrable harm to the community in accordance with Policy L2, and that the culture, religion or ideology which the future occupier is promoting or advocating is not a material planning consideration. However, proposed change of use would result in demonstrable harm to the community, and the ideology of the future occupier is a material planning consideration due to the negative effect on the character of the leisure zone and potential loss of privacy for its customers, who I would describe as neighbours, which you say are a long way from neighbours, but they're right next door. So I'll set out the reasons why. Harlow Leisurezone is central to the community in Harlow. Not only is it frequented by its members and residents of Harlow looking to use the facilities for fitness purposes, it houses a wide range of services for people of all ages and is used as a thoroughfare for teenagers going to Harlow College. COVID vaccine clinic is also currently in residence. The proposed residency of the Christian Revival Church at the Leisure Zone poses a threat to the well-being of that community and subsequently goes against Policy L2, as it could be a deterrent to people using the Leisure Zone services and will cause harm. The CRC are an evangelical church. with part of their mission cited as evangelising our community. Their mandate is outlined as win the lost at any cost. This potentially represents a privacy issue for Leisurezone customers. They're also described as a tithing church, so they ask their members to donate 10% of their monthly salary to be under God's protection. To a vulnerable member of the community who may be on tax credits or benefits, who is evangelised by the church, this could have a significant impact on their economic well-being. A look at the social media feeds of their pastors, Faber and Karen Moreau, raises further concern. Here there are common themes around anti-abortion, querying the definition of Islamophobia, and pro-conversion therapy messaging. So, for example, Karen earlier this year described Mermaids, an LGBTQ+ charity for young people, as a vile organisation, the beginning acceptance of paedophilia and deranged sexual identities. There's a question here over how the Leisurezone's diverse customer base can sit comfortably with an evangelical organisation promoting such polarising messages. Or in other words, it will harm the neighbours. Also of significant concern is a strong anti-vaccine stance, and I quote again from Karen's Twitter feed. Masks, millions of experimental vaccinations and still in severe lockdown, the biggest manifestation of evil this world has seen so far. This, coupled with Faber Maurice's retweets promoting hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin as drugs more effective against the pandemic, must raise concerns about anti-vaccine messages being promoted. And this, with above concerns, prevent a real and fundamental safeguarding issue, particularly in connection with vulnerable and young users of the
Charge is
Leisurezoone.
up, I'm afraid.
Can I just take another 30 seconds?
Not 30 seconds, you have 15.
The location is not appropriate, it's not a good fit. The council has a duty of care for residents of Harlow, with the loss of privacy for Leisurezone members, potential reduction in the use of facilities, and a detrimental effect on the Leisurezone. I ask the committee to reject this planning application. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have Councillor Tony Edwards. Use the other Tony. Councillor.
Thank you. As the Harlow Sports and Leisure Trust called this a good fit, I thought I would go on to the website of the CRC Church, and I also went onto the Twitter feeds of a couple of pastors, Karen Matthias and Harlow Marias. I was appalled to see the amount of anti-vaccine propaganda, it's the only way to describe it, anti-COVID vaccine propaganda on that site. I was also appalled to see that they were against the ban on conversion therapy for gay people. So they were basically saying that conversion therapy was okay and ought to be encouraged. So how, I mean, one talks about, one was saying earlier on that the officer said that these things aren't material. I think there's a wider issue here, and the wider issue is that we as Harlow Council, in our corporate plan, the Harlow corporate plan talks about corporate priorities. One is well-being and social inclusion. How on earth will the granting of this promote social inclusion? If one looks at the, I was slightly dismayed by the way that they were dismissed. If one looks at what the objections, the numerous objections that were put into this, people have enormous concerns about the potential impact of this church and the impact that it's likely to have, particularly in relation to the anti-COVID vaccination. The other thing I'd like to remind us of is that this building was publicly funded. It opened in 2010. It cost £25 million. It was a partnership between Harlow Council, Harlow and District Sports Trust, and the Homes and Community Agency. In essence, what one is looking to do is to hand over, or to rent, 1/8 of the ground floor of this building to this particular church. It's a huge amount of ground floor. I went onto the charities website to check on the Sports and Leisure Trust. It talks about providing or assisting to providing facilities for recreation, physical education and other leisure time occupation. It talks about education, advancement of health, disability, arts, culture, heritage. Nowhere within the Sports and Leisure Trust is there any mention of religious education or the provision of religious education. So I call upon the councillors to reject this planning application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Questions and clarification from the officer? See any hands? Not missing anybody? No?
Just one clarification. Thank you, Chair. In whose name is this application? I saw the application's name is in the name of a company, but where does this church link into the application?
So, I'll find out who the details, who the applicant is, Councillor, but crucially, who the applicant is, who the owner is not a material planning consideration. It's equivalent if we took the view that this church, irrespective of our personal views, if we took the view that this church is not inclusive, but a Church of England church is inclusive, that's the difference. It's a different church, it's a different ideology, and you're talking about social inclusion, then actually what you're doing is excluding a part of society. But that is not a matter for this committee. We are talking about, if we're discussing the principle of development, we're talking strictly about policy 1L.
Okay, the question now. Two presentations that have been made just now. Is there within those a material ground that we can reject this on?
Unfortunately not.
Because I'd love to see one. What about the act? The point that you raised, that there is evidence that this church has acted in detriment to members of its own community.
Again, Councillor, we don't have policy within the Town Planning Act to refuse the application on those grounds.
I think I'd like to recommend that everybody reads this week's Economist. There's an article on Brazil in its special report. And part of it explains the detrimental effect of these churches on society. Okay, apologies.
Councillor Suter.
Thank you, Chair. Where's this church situated at the moment? Why they want to come to Harlow?
Again, Councillor, I think we're getting into the specifics of who submitted the application and who's going to be occupying it, which is not a material planning consideration. It is a church, it's a community use, and in policy terms, it's allowed.
May I make one further question? If we reject this application, what is the probability of a successful appeal against us?
It depends on what you refuse it on, but if you refuse it on in principle objection, probably no, you probably won't win any appeal, because the policy...
Would they appeal though if it were rejected on the grounds that, probably most people in Harlow oppose it?
It's up to the applicant as to whether they'll object. They have the right to appeal it.
Thank you.
I think what you're doing, I think the principle here is it's a change of use.
Yep.
Nothing else, doesn't matter who's going in there. I know we all have our principles and we have all our ideologies, but it's just a question of change of use. And the use they want is comparable with policy L2. So if you try and refuse it, you have a problem, because you've got no grounds to really refuse it, because unless you think the change of, well, not was wrong, I'll stop there, but you haven't got anything. So any more discussions? Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. This is discussion, yes? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm a bit dismayed by the leisure zone and not able to find uses for the local community rather than just a church, which I think actually dissuades the local community from taking part because of the way they look at things. I think there's problems here from what one of the other speakers said, that against about the welfare for residents and residents using that leisure zone, and about the social inclusion that it includes. So I know there seems to be no planning policy we could object on. I'm still going to object because I don't think it's right.
Councillor Davis? Dan, sorry.
First of all, Chair, I declare an interest. I'm a company member of the Harlow Sports Trust. I too am appalled by this whole application. I represent the local community, and forgive me, I've forgotten the lady's name, but I must echo entirely her sentiments in regards to how this sect, this cult, could actually have an impact on the local community. We're not talking about the Church of England here. We're talking about a sect, a cult that takes over people's lives. And as a matter of principle, I'm going to join my colleague in actually voting this down. I certainly will be raising it in September at the annual general meeting of the company. I have spoken to a number of the trustees who are all 6 and 7s over this. There are a number of them who will echo the sentiments that people like Tony Edwards have actually expressed tonight. It is the most unsatisfactory situation. This building was paid for entirely by public money. 1 penny a week was collected from the council tenants in the 1950s, which built the original sports centre. That land was given by the Development Corporation. That land was then sold to finance the leisure zone. Public money by this local authority of £750,000 a year for 5 years, which they sorted away. They had £15 million of public money in reserve. It shouldn't be treated like a personal fiefdom. It should actually be publicly accountable to the community of Harlow. And to have this South London, we've had it graphically described from the internet, of the anti-vax and all the rest of it, of how reactionary this organisation coming into Harlow, the absolute centre into what could be a very vulnerable community as well. Harlow Nextwell is one of the poorest areas in Essex, and in those circumstances we have very vulnerable people who could actually be giving up, as the lady said, up to 10% of their income. It's a principled matter. From time to time, councillors have to speak out. Whether in fact it's 0.1678 of a particular document or whatever is irrelevant to me. This is a principled issue and we should vote this down.
Anybody else?
One last comment. As a matter of principle and in all conscience, I've seen these sects in operation abroad. They feed upon the most vulnerable, and I will not vote for this, notwithstanding the fact we have no material grounds.
Okay, well, we go to recommendation. You'll have to find something to refuse it on. So the application, the recommendation is to grant planning permission, and you've got conditions 1, 2 and 3. All those in favour? All those against? So, what are you refusing it on? Not from cultural or?
Chair, as we said before at these meetings, the officer will advise us.
No, I'm afraid you have to do it. The officer's made a recommendation, so you need to come up with something.
Chair,
If you give us, don't interrupt me. If you give us something she can get hold of to write up a refusal, then she'll do it. You have to give us something that she can get her head round.
Chair, I thought we cleared this up 2 meetings ago.
No.
Well, sorry, we did. We cleared this up 2 meetings ago. Well, let the planning officer explain. Did we clear this up 2 meetings ago or not?
I think you needed to give me some material considerations, but just listening to the discussion, correct me if I'm wrong, but our members say the proposed development of the proposed church would result in harm to existing users of the leisure centre by reason of activities proposed and the ethos of the proposed occupier. The proposal would therefore be contrary to policies PL1 and L2. I mean, we're on thin ice here, but that's fundamentally what I think you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, you're happy with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is fair enough. Give you enough to get a head around it. So it could be, Councillor Davis, if you're on the committee, you could get your committee to refuse the lease. That would be a way around it. Anyway, that brings me to the end of the actual agenda.